Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and I am the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture. Welcome to the second half of the sixth season of the Center's Religion and series. Religion and is a series of monthly conversations between leading academics and practitioners hosted by the Center to engage and enhance critically important conversations on the state of religion in America and many times around the world. The last episode was an exciting conversation that explored the perils of teaching and doing scholarship in times of tension and intense political and public scrutiny. I want to thank Robert Orsi, Matt Kressler, Atalia Omer, and Nikki Young for a challenging and at times quite provocative conversation. If you didn't get a chance to catch it, please check it out on our YouTube channel. Or if you want to listen to that or any episode, we are now available everywhere you download your favorite podcast. For the second half of this season, we are continuing to think about the world on fire, but we are asking a little bit of a more specific question about where does the study and engagement of religion live if it no longer exists or is slowly being removed from the university and the classroom. We will be exploring podcasts today. We'll be looking at innovative religious studies programs next month. We'll be looking a little bit later in this season at the role of data and big data and social media in the way that it presents and engages the question of religion, and then how larger frames or larger public celebrations like the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence help us to reframe or think about religion and religious studies and puts it in front of an audience who wants to think about that question in more precise or interesting or compelling ways. Today's panelists, however, will explore religion and podcasts as public engagement. As many of you know, podcasts have become a tool for scholars to share ideas beyond academic publishing and the classroom, and in an era where traditional methods have gotten wider, and we've moved beyond books and articles, and we're looking to explore and engage a broader audience. Podcasts have come to the center, and so today we've gathered together really an amazing group of scholars and thinkers and podcasters to help us think about how scholars use podcasts, how the platforms functions, what ways it really it engenders engagement and involvement, what are the promises, and unfortunately, what are some of the downsides and things that we should be concerned about as we move forward? So today's host is my friend and my colleague, Andrea Jain. Dr. Andrea Jain is a professor of religious studies at Indiana University, Indianapolis, and a research affiliate at Indiana University's Environmental Resilience Institute. And she is also the editor of the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, the author of Selling Yoga, From Counterculture to Pop Culture, and her most recent book, Peace, Love, and Yoga, The Politics of Global Spirituality. She received her doctorate degree in religious studies from Rice University, and her areas of research include religion and capitalism, global spirituality and modern yoga, gender, sexuality and religion, theories of religion, non-humans. She's a documentarian. She's an amazing teacher. She's a person I just like to hang out with and learn so much about. So I know I'm putting you in good hands, and I'm handing you over to Dr. Andrea Jain for this conversation about religion and podcasting as public engagement. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Joseph. I really appreciate being invited to host this conversation today, and I'm really honored to be a part of it alongside these awesome panelists we have today. So thanks for that great introduction. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to now introduce our panelists. We have Megan Goodwin today. She's a scholar of gender, race, sexuality, politics, and American religions. She's senior editor at Religion Dispatches and leads the Feral Nerd Consulting, which provides web and graphic design. She also co-hosts and co-produced the award-winning podcast Keeping It 101, A Killjoy's Introduction to Religion. Their most recent book is Religion is Not Done With You, and it's now available through Beacon Press. Brad Onishi, he's here today, and he's a social commentator, scholar, and co-host of the Straight White American Jesus podcast. He founded Access Mundi Media in 2023 in order to provide a platform for research-based podcast focused on safeguarding democracy from the threats of extremism and authoritarianism. Brad is a frequent guest on national radio, podcast, and television outlets including Fresh Air with Terry Gross and MSNBC. His podcast ranks in the top 50 of politics shows on Apple's podcast charts. And his book, Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next, is available now. And finally, Chris Stevenson is co-founder and president of the private Digital First National Museum of American History. He's also the founder of America's Quilt of Faith, a civic nonprofit that champions the indispensability of religion to the American experiment in self-government. Chris has a Bachelor of Science in Applied Physics, Master's of Arts in Teaching Physics, and a Master's of Science in Agricultural Engineering. He's the host of the Museum's podcast, Religion and the American Experience. And he is the author of Letters from an American Husband and Father. So thank you all for being here. This is really wonderful to be able to be in conversation with you and to spend some time talking about religion and podcasts as a part of this larger conversation the center's been having on where does religious studies live as it's being pushed out of the classroom. And so I want to start kind of with that theme as it connects to work in the podcast world. Obviously, one of the places that religion lives, or religious studies scholarship and thinking lives outside of the classroom, is in the podcast world with people like you doing the outstanding work you're doing. But I want to kind of challenge the assumption that that might only be a good thing, and ask where are the downsides, or can there be downsides, especially if we aren't, or if we're framing relocating the study of religion and scholarship on religion in terms of a replacement of the kind of traditional methods of distributing scholarship on religion, such as books and articles, or traditional teaching in classrooms at universities and colleges. Because we're talking at a time when religion departments are being cut, IU being a great example. Anything that screams diversity, equity, or inclusion is being cut at universities. Again, IU is a great example. We just had the sudden and abrupt cut of the MLK dinner that the university in Indianapolis has held for decades. And so where are we in the podcast world addressing this problem, rather than simply replacing religion in these traditional contexts? Where are we engaging in critical conversation about the problems to the cuts regarding the cuts to the study of religion in universities? That's just to kind of lead us off, and I hope you all will kind of branch off with your own questions, concerns, contributions. But if anyone wants to kind of chime in and start there, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea and Joseph and everybody for having us. It's great to be in conversation with y'all. I think it's a great question. I just don't know that it's a question for us. I mean, I got flushed out of the academy well before the academy started flushing religious studies. Brad made a conscious decision to step out. A lot, if not most of the folks I know who are doing this labor are doing it in untraditional positions and or not traditional relationships to the academy. So it's absolutely an important question. I absolutely think religious studies should be part of whatever public education we're offering to the people. Without sounding too bitchy, I hope I just don't know that that's our problem to fix.
I'll jump in on that too, and in some ways, totally agree with what Megan is saying. I think on a day-to-day basis, my focus is on public scholarship and audiences, a variety of publics that are trying to find reliable and relevant sources of information, storytelling, et cetera, in a world where that is increasingly difficult to locate. However, I will say that what we've done at Access Media and all of the podcast series that we've made is we've tried to do two things at once, which is hard and we've not always been successful, which is create podcasts that fit on a higher ed syllabus really well and contribute to the study of religion in the classroom, but are also an easy fit for the nonprofit leader, the eighth grade teacher, the interested layperson, the Sunday school teacher, the clergy driving to work on the subway, listening while they're doing the dishes, people that just want to learn and understand their world in a more expansive way. So I've never thought of what we're doing as replacing anything. I've always thought of it as a complement to the guild that trained me. And my favorite thing to do is still to read and to talk with colleagues. My favorite thing to do is not to listen to podcasts, which don't tell anyone I said that. And so I've never seen what we're doing as replacing those forms of scholarship. I've always seen it as taking that scholarship to the gates of the ivory tower and bringing it to the grassroots in any manner possible. So, however, I'll shut up. I agree with Megan. I am not actively trying to solve the problem of the religious studies programs being cut just because I just that's not where my focus is on a day to day, even though I mourn it and I see the writing on the wall as one that looks pretty bad going forward.
And I'll add to that as well that I don't see what I'm doing is replacing those traditional religious studies programs, or fixing the problem because there are so many problems to fix right now. And I never sort of thought of that as we went out on this podcasting branch. I like Brad. I'm trying to make this fantastic and super, super important scholarship about religion available to more and more people. By the way, before I forget, in your introduction, you said that I was the founder of the National Museum of American Religion, American History. That is not correct. On the National Mall, I am the founder of the National Museum of American Religion, although I get those two confused sometimes and has said that before. But anyways, it's really, and you asked about downsides, Andrea. As we put out scholars on our podcast and try to get what they're saying, what they've written about into the hands of the layperson, there are some downsides because we're not saying this, but it could be that people think, well, I don't have to read this or read that, or put in a little bit more hard work to understand this part about religion and the American experience, about religion's role. I can just listen to this podcast, and I don't think Megan or Brad or Megan or Brad think that we're trying to do this. Reading and talking and studying with colleagues is the way to do it, but at least we're doing something to get this really, really significant and indispensable, as a matter of fact, information out into the wider public.
Yeah, I mean, every single episode of Keeping It 101 includes homework. Like the point of the show is to introduce a conversation rather than to say this is it, this is everything that you need to know. From the very beginning, the mission has been to bring more people into these conversations that we were having in classrooms, but definitely saw a need for out and beyond that. I mean, for me, and I submitted this question, I'm not sure if you got it, Andrea, but I saw getting into this less as, a replacement or as something that's better or more important than. I think we need all hands. We've been talking about gutter punk scholarship since the very first season. It was a way of democratizing not just access to this knowledge, but who gets to claim what the field is and how it's being shaped. It is a really funky space at this point to be, at best, marginal to the academy, and also having conversations about how many folks teach with our podcast, how many folks are using our book in religious studies, one-on-one classes. We found out at this past AAR that UNC, which my co-host Elise Morgenstein First and I are both alums of, uses the book that we wrote that came out of the podcast in every single intro to religion class that they teach. That's wild. I think what it demonstrates to me, and I don't know if this is a downside or not, but we need new metrics for measuring and assessing impact. And I think that is particularly true as so many of these departments are under fire or being dissolved.
I just want to completely agree with that last part you said, Megan. That I think that's just spot on. And I just going off of what you said and Chris said, I want to just say that what we've experienced on our show is that there's a lot of folks will hear an author, they'll hear a religion scholar, they'll hear about a book on our show that they would have never heard about before, and they go out and buy it. The ones who are happy to hear that 45-minute discussion and not buy the book, I hate to break it to everyone listening, they weren't going to buy your book anyway. They weren't going to pay $38 to Duke University Press, and they would have never heard about it. And I think that's just we kind of need to admit that to ourselves as scholars, that if we are serious about helping people, then we have to face up to the fact that the audience for the 300-page, $42 book in hardcover is different than the folks that will give you an hour on their way to work on a Thursday morning. And if we can't accept that, that's okay. But it just seems to be a cold, hard reality to me. They were never going to buy the book anyway. I don't know how many of y'all have given talks at conferences where, there's 4 panelists and there's 6 audience members, but I've done that. I've done the four panelists, 3 audience members. So I don't know if anyone can beat that. And so when I think back to those experiences, I think I would love it if 3,000 people bought this book that we just highlighted. I'm really stoked, however, that however many folks, sometimes it's 20,000 people stuck for an hour with a professor from Ithaca College talking about their new book, related to this, that, and this. That seems like a win, and that's one I'll take. So,
yeah, I think it's also a conversation about accessibility and portability, right? So, not to absolutely refuse the downsides question, but I think one of the things that we learned during quarantine, which is very much when Keeping It 101 got off the ground, was that there's a desperate need both for inside and outside the academy for media that can be taken places and consumed while you're doing other things. The number of folks I have talked to that say, I have a new baby, I'm responsible for care, I'm commuting, I can't sit down for 3 hours and pick this up and put this down, but a podcast I can pick up and put down. So for me, it is only ever fleshing out, I guess, which is a weird thing to say about an audio medium, but it's fleshing out and expanding our offerings rather than replacing a traditional scholarship. I think there will always be, inshallah, there will always be a place for that 300-page manuscript that really gets to the nitty-gritty, the tiny little questions that help us reorganize our entire ways of thinking. I think those are so crucial. I think this is just, if we're thinking about this as critical thinking as a way to help folks think more carefully, more closely about the world around them and what is happening, it is one more wave in the battle against illiteracy, ignorance, and outright white Christian nationalism. So yeah, again, it feels like a very all hands on deck to me.
Just to chime in, so I'm hearing you all say that that a lot of the work you're doing is making responsible and reliable scholarship and writing on religion accessible to broader audiences. And as Megan put it, these 300-page manuscripts, right? Accessible to broader audiences, people who don't have the privilege to sit and read a 300-page manuscript. And that absolutely makes sense to me. And I think that the accessibility piece is so critical to why these podcasts are important. The flip side is, what do we do when that reliable and responsible scholarship is no longer available because it's no longer happening in universities, because the departments aren't there, the classrooms aren't there, because we're no longer offering courses in religion, so we're no longer having the departments, so we're no longer having the research time to write the books. What happens then when that that reliable scholarship is no longer available to begin with.
I mean, not
Are,
keep harping on this, but folks have been doing that work outside the academy for decades now because they've had to. The job market has been shit for a long time, and it becomes a generational problem when we're not training those scholars anymore. But the pursuit of knowledge is a human instinct, and I think we will just find different ways of it being. Yeah, I think Shelley would say germinated.
are we really looking at a projection that says we're not going to have this scholarship in the future? I mean, probably not where we are to zero, but a significant decrease. Is that what it looks like?
Yeah, that's what it looks like, and that's why the center is kind of the theme of this particular season is around the university on fire, the study of religion on fire, the world on
Yeah.
fire, in the sense of the study of religion is being pushed out of the classroom and pushed out of the university. Again, I don't think that is your job as podcasters to solve. I just think it's an interesting kind of problem for podcasting on the topic of religion, given that what you are doing, the important work that podcasts do is making accessible, reliable information
Yeah.
on religion to broader audiences.
Yeah. I mean, if that comes, I base most of my podcast on reading a book from a scholar. That's a majority of it. And if those books are and recent books, I try to keep up with, the most recent scholarship. And if that then dries up, that will definitely impact how we do our podcast. We want to have the best scholarship, the most recent. And if that's going to be further and further back in history, that will be problematic, and we'll have to. I don't know how exactly we'll deal with it. Besides, mining what is, further back in history and providing our listeners with less and less timely information. But there are other workarounds, I'm sure. I just haven't really thought through it.
I mean, I just to pick up on what Megan said, I think that the ingenuity and the human pursuit of knowledge is something I believe in. But beyond that, I think we're in a time of maybe it goes without saying, systems and orders and institutions breaking down, coming to an end, being destroyed, being leveled. The university on fire, USAID, USIP, the federal government, 300,000 federal workers. We're threatening to invade Greenland. Things are not normal anywhere. And I think, one of the things for me is this isn't a local problem to just the study of religion. So the tragic opportunity is to say, what are we going to how are we going to rebuild institutions and systems that will provide people the privilege, the freedom, the room, the safety to pursue the kinds of knowledge that have been pursued in the study of religion graduate departments and centers all over this country and many others across the world. One thing we've gotten off the ground at Access Mundi that is really in its pilot nascent stages is a kind of antidote to PragerU. So we're creating videos and that are professionally shot and scripted and with professional VFX and everything else that will be a kind of answer to PragerU's infiltration of our education system. Some of you are going to hate that. Some of you are going to are rolling your eyes now. That's completely fine. We can talk about it. But to me, PragerU is this terrible example of an organization that's raised $60 million, is now a prominent part of our education system across this country, not to mention the religious education across this country. And that's not done through traditional academic channels. Now, some of you are already thinking, well, they don't do actual scholarships, so it's easier. And you're right. But I guess for me, that kind of thinking is where we have to head, because regardless of what happens here in the next 6 months or 6 weeks, it seems as if we're facing a time of great disruption and change. And I think only creative and revolutionary thinking is going to help us.
I want to kind of flip this question and turn it around and say, some of the problems that we're facing in academia. I wonder if you all as podcasters might be facing similar problems for the same reason. For example, just the increasing commodification of knowledge. And if you all are facing challenges around, for example, the price of podcasts or access to podcasts, or the issues around censorship, uh, if these are challenges that you are facing, similarly to how scholars in higher education are struggling.
I mean, I can straight up tell you one of the reasons keeping it one-on-one wrapped when we did was because we had exhausted the funding possibilities through professional organizations and Lisa's University. We expanded the show when we had more help, and when we couldn't afford the help anymore, we not just cost-wise, but labor-wise couldn't afford to keep it going. And I mean, to be honest, part of that is our absolute emphasis on accessibility not being up for debate. So one of the most expensive things we were doing was having the episodes transcribed, and it is pricey, and cleaning up those transcripts is time consuming. So if we wanted to keep our commitments, we had to limit the scope of the show. So yeah, I think things are tricky all over, but it's absolutely something we had to confront.
We have challenges. It seems like money for when it comes to religion and society, things including our podcast, for example, or the museum itself, the money is on the extremes, on the edges, on the margins. That's where people want to put their money because they want their religious story told and to be dominant. The National Museum of American Religion and our podcast lives right in the middle, where history lives. The historical record is, the spectrum is broad, and it's not on the edges. And so that's one of our real challenges, is finding people who still, one way to put it is finding people who still believe the middle can hold, to Brad's description of our current political landscape or cultural landscape. Can the middle hold? I don't know.
I think I'll just say I think we've kind of reached this place in this podcast industry where the money has gone all the way to the top. So you're not going to make, I get folks who approach me every week like, hey, I want to make a podcast, and can you help me? And they have great ideas, and in almost every case, I'm like, yeah, I would love to do this. Let's do it. And then the reality is, in a for-profit model, it's never going to work. I mean, you can have a show that really has a good listenership and has people who want to hear you, and you're going to make like $80 a month or $180 a month or something, which won't pay for the show. So that part of it is really hard. Unless you're Conan O'Brien or Amy Poehler or Dax Shepard or Joe Rogan, it's really hard to like fund a show and much less make money off of a show. It's just extreme. With that said, I one of the things I want to encourage people to not overlook is that if you have a podcast and you have people who are listening to you, and you can do that show in a way that fits into your other commitments in your life, once again, I have folks who say, hey, I have a podcast and I have 350 people listening, regularly. I wish it was more. And one of the things I want to flip on the head here is like, we all wish it was more. In a world of TikTok views, it's really easy to think that, when somebody gets 4 million views of a 40-second reel, that's who you're competing with, and you're not. I would go back to the fact that, hey, you wrote your first book, that was your dissertation. How many copies did it sell? You went and gave a keynote and did a great job. and there was, 46 people in the audience who were engaged and had a great discussion with you, and then it was over. If you're convincing 100 people, 200 people, 50 people to listen to you every week, and not just you, but the scholarship or whatever it is you're focusing on, just don't lose sight of what that means, and that is an educational service. And to Megan's point, economically, in terms of labor, in terms of time commitment, in terms of family, in terms of career, in terms of all the ingredients to the recipe, it may not be something one can do forever, one can do whatever. But I just think that there's a lot of folks out there with projects that are really helpful to the people that listen. And it's easy to think that they're not worth it if you don't have 85,000 people listening every month, or week or whatever. And I just want to flip those metrics on their head and say, if you're doing a really good public scholarship and you're reaching 50 or 100 people, that's a good thing, as long as it fits into what you're up to, and is something that is not a self, sacrificing you on the altar of the labor.
And I think it's also important to note that podcasts that have millions of followers, and they can be doing really bad things, like providing really bad information and really toxic and dangerous. I mean, this is obvious, but I think it's important to be said that, that's not a good goal necessarily, to just have as many listeners as possible. You do what you need to do. You do what you feel is right. You put out good, real, and accurate information. We live in a world full of lies from the most powerful people on the earth, and they're everywhere, and they drown and we're not in that. We're about accuracy and truth, and who's going to listen? That's up to them.
I was really glad that Brad brought up the issue of social media, because one of the things that we thought a lot about, particularly at the beginning of the show, was that podcasting is kind of its own medium, right? And the thing that sets it apart from other content production is the assumption that it's dialogic, that you're in conversation with the folks that are listening to you. That was particularly possible when Twitter wasn't a disgusting child sex abuse material producing Nazi zombie. Academic Twitter did a lot of the work that I think podcasting does to democratize not just knowledge, but the hierarchy of the academy. So we were talking to folks at all levels that we would never have access to otherwise. Shout out to people like Judith Weisenfeld, who got really invested, not just in like supporting us, but in these conversations. From our very first episode, we had folks jumping in to say, okay, well, you're talking about a difference between religion and theology, and I'm a theologian. I do process theology. I'm not seeing myself in this conversation. How else can we expand this definition? So it was always a collaborative and expansive undertaking. And there's just zero way that our show would have taken off the way that it did if Twitter didn't exist in the way that it did, and if Elise and I weren't terminally online, frankly. So another consideration while we were thinking about what's the natural end of the show was, it's not the conversation we were having at the start. We haven't found, and this is not just Elise and I think academics at large have not found a new landing place for that kind of conversation and collaboration. Blue Sky is trying its best, bless it, but it doesn't have the buy-in. Instagram, the buy-in is huge, but it's not set up for conversations. TikTok, forget it. You wind up on the wrong side of an algorithm and your whole feed is just jacked for 6 months, which happened to us because Elise wound up on the wrong side of an adoption conversation. So yeah, a thing that I would love help thinking through, if any of you all have solved this, I would please. But I'm curious about what the future of podcasting, and particularly academic podcasting that relies so heavily on this dialogic component, is without something like Twitter.
I just completely agree with you, Megan. Blue Sky's doing its best. It's not the good old days. I mean, I used to see you every day. I used to see like,
Oh, right?
I used to see like hundreds of academic colleagues every day on Twitter. And there's people I see now in person. I'm like, I miss you. Because I
Right.
used to see you on Twitter every day. And I used to
refer
know
it as
like,
my office. Like
yeah,
that's where I went to work. So yeah.
like I knew what article you just published. I knew what thread you had just put on because somebody was saying something dumb about um, late 19th century American religion, and somebody jumped in, and um, the democratization was real. You had the tenured professor from Princeton talking to the community college, lecturer. You had the grad student talking, and that's not been solved
Yeah.
by any means. And I also think I just want to say too that I think that the pivot to video is a challenge because our show got going in the pandemic as well. That was a moment when podcasting was really important to people and enough. And what I mean by enough is like you could have a podcast and that's what people expected from you. These days, what they expect is that you have a podcast and that podcast is also a newsletter. And then that newsletter is also you on video with professional cameras and lighting and having done yourself so you look nice on camera and with graphics and animation such that anybody under 35 watching on YouTube will actually stay with you for more than 90 seconds. That's just a different ask. Um, Podcasting is one thing. And as you said, it's a register where the benefit of podcasting is you're in people's ears and they feel like they're talking, they feel like they're part of this conversation. When you go to YouTube, you're kind of just, it's open water. People find you, they make really mean comments, they make fun of you, some of them love you. You're out in open waters. You're not like the relationship is less intimate. And then the newsletter factor is great because if you're like many of us scholars, reading is kind of how you like to do things. And I love reading and I love reading smart things from my colleagues who send out their newsletter every week. How do you create a system where you can newsletter 2-3 times a week, podcast once a week, put out a video that looks like it's supposed to look according to 2026 standards once a week, pay everybody to do that in terms of editors and graphics and all that, not lose your mind, not feel like you're putting out content just to put it out because you're an influencer, you're actually a scholar. This is like, this is a lot. And so I'm just trying to jump on. The social media stuff is hard. There's also questions about, is it worth it? So I know for me personally, I kind of have given up on Instagram because even if we get like 3,000-4,000 people to view um, our Instagram reel, they're going to get kind of 45 seconds of a podcast episode. And the conversion rate there is slim, right?
Yeah.
So if you get 3,000 people to watch an Instagram reel, how many of them are like, I'm scrolling at midnight when I should be sleeping. I'm going to stop my scrolling, go find this guy's podcast, subscribe to the feed, and make sure I listen to the hour-and-a-half conversation tomorrow. The number of conversions there is really, really low for what it takes to do a really good job on Instagram without again, looking incompetent and not like you don't know what you're doing. So these challenges are abound as well. It's not just a podcast challenge. It's a media modality Swiss Army knife problem that is hard to solve.
Yeah, we do social media, and I sometimes feel like you, Brad, to just give up on some of this. It's like we're chasing something that can never be caught. And even if we caught it, what would it actually do to further what we're trying to do? It's like, I am also not a podcast listener. I do a little bit, but it's like I'm doing this because I feel like we need to. And there is good. We're getting information out there. However many people listen, that's good. But just information, like information intake for our U.S. population, it's I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to get people, to listen to the things they need to listen to be productive citizens in regards to religion's role in the American project. But we're doing it. We're doing the podcast. We're doing the stuff. We're giving it a shot. But yeah, it's hazy as far as success in our overarching goal.
I want to pick up on Chris's comment that part of what you all do, what you all are doing in your podcast is working with audiences on being productive citizens. I think that's like such a key point there. And it's also something that we think a lot about in academic teaching.
Sure.
We think about teaching our students to be productive citizens and that being a part of a university education. And so I wonder, and I'm connecting this to a question that Brad raised over email with the panelists before we met here. What's the relationship between podcasting and teaching? How are they related? Um, for those of you who have been in the classroom or have been students in the classroom, either, as students, professors, or both, what do you see as the relationship between teaching and podcasting?
I mean, for me, podcasting was always teaching, full stop. It was a pedagogy podcast. It was not just here's some information about religion. It was here's how we get at these questions. Here's why these questions matter. But on a personal note, it was encouraging and humbling to realize that stuff that, as Brad pointed out, I was on Twitter all day, every day. I was doing a lot of yelling. Concepts that I yelled about all day, every day on Twitter did not land the way that the podcast episodes did. And I'm thinking particularly of the cults episode. I saw that shift thinking, not just in random people that I spoke to, but like in colleagues that I had had these conversations with multiple times. And I just kind of shrugged it off and shrugged it off. And then we did the cults podcast episode. And then suddenly people are citing it and people are saying, oh, I'm not using that word in the same way anymore. And I'm rethinking this. And Elise, my co-host, and Bashert pointed out that the tone of how you present the information matters. Our tone on the podcast was always teacherly. It is teaching voice. And, this is a thing that I struggle with because of the autism, but it turns out, yes, the tone does matter. And if you're presenting it as like, hey, everybody, we're so excited to learn these things. Did you know? Come on in. You're making it safe for folks to engage with unfamiliar information in a way that's not possible if you're just like, oh, are we having this conversation again? Even though that is how I feel on the inside. But I also personally, I think, have patience for students in a way that I don't for the general public. It helps me to reconfigure the audience as folks who are smart and engaged, but just, again, haven't had the luxury and the privilege of sitting down and really digging into these questions.
Yeah.
And that, in terms of engaged citizenship, helps me, I think, be a kinder, more patient person out in the world where so many of us are so upset about all of the atrocities that we see going on, but we're not all coming from the same training. We're not all coming from the same lived experience. And so, yeah, using podcasting and using that teaching voice, I think, just way boosts the accessibility and also, in a practical way, made us really teachable in traditional classrooms.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Megan. You that so much of what you just said is fueled what we've done, and I just want to say one or two more things. Is when you teach, you can, if you want, take the attitude that you're better than your students, and that you're just a world-class intellectual who's giving them the privilege of standing in front of them for an hour, 3 days a week. If you do that, my guess is you're a really bad teacher, and your students hate you. So if you don't do that, if you actually teach in a way that is filled with compassion and interest and curiosity about what your students need and what they want, the questions that lie at the heart of what they've brought into the classroom as human beings, if that's what you take to podcasting, then you're going to end up with what Megan just said. You're going to end up with an environment where people are like, hey, these are big questions they're addressing about white supremacy, about xenophobia, about racism, about misogyny, about et cetera. But I don't feel like intimidated or like I'm not welcome or I don't have the right degree to be here. And so, yeah, I'm going to stick around because these are just human beings having really important conversations, but I trust them because of their training. That's, to me, is it. Podcasting is teaching because if you remind yourself of that, the second part is you'll resist the temptation to give people candy. So going back to social media, like there are moments for every podcaster, any content creator that's like, I'm not popular enough. I don't have enough followers. I don't have enough listens, downloads, clicks. Look at them over there. Look at them over there. They're doing this. They're doing that. And an Instagram reel, quite frankly, is often candy. Now, not always, and I know some of you are going to email me, great people on Instagram that are giving people amazing information, doing awesome stuff. But for the most part, the things that win on Instagram and TikTok are things that inflame you. The things that like give you false curiosity about some clickbait thing, gossip, sex, etc. Yay, that wins on those algorithms. If you think of podcasting as teaching, you'll always remember, there's no way to teach somebody by giving them candy. Like like 45 seconds of Skittles is not going to work. I've got to give them 45 minutes of like a real meal. And that means less people are going to come and less people are going to listen or watch or whatever. And if I want to give people candy, I should just get into a different business, Like a lot of people have approached me over the years like, "Hey, I want to do a thing, public scholarship so I can be famous and stuff and viral and rich." My first response is that's never going to happen. Second of all, never talk to me again because your motivations suck. And I don't want to be around anyone who's trying to do this for that reason. But if you remind yourself that this is about teaching, then you'll resist, I think, those temptations.
Yeah. A conversation we had a lot while I was doing sacred rights stuff is a distinction between public scholarship and public intellectualism. And for me, public intellectualism is that I want to be a brand. I want to be a Reza Aslan, right? Like I want my name to resonate in a specific way. I'm with Brad. Never talk to me again. Like you can't sit with us. My project, my goal, and frankly, the only academy I'm interested in building is one where the scholarship is collaborative, it is invitational, it is expansive, and people are there because they want to be there. So like, I truly do not give a care if anybody knows my name. What I care about is that we're thinking in bigger, smarter, more expansive ways about what religion does in the world, what people do with it, and why it matters. That's it. That's the whole project. And the more folks who want to get in on that project, the better off we are. So again, this was a founding principle of Sacred Rights. Was I never admitted anyone into the program who was just talking about what they wanted to do for themselves and how they wanted to build their own brand. It was always, here are the issues that I'm interested in. Who else can I work with? Who else can I learn from? Right? Who else's amazing knowledge can I build on to take my work in a direction that I would have never imagined? And yeah, ultimately for me, that is a pedagogical question.
I want to jump in here. I want to just remind our audience that you can pose questions. We'd love to hear them. I've already been kind of taking a look and trying to incorporate some of those into the questions I'm posing to our panelists, but there's still some time to pose questions. We've got 10 minutes left, so please do so. And then I want to build on this conversation about branding and name recognizability. I wonder how that connects to questions about uh, barriers to doing podcast work, because of course it's hard to get into this work. It's hard to have the privilege of time, energy, resources to do this work. And so, what are the barriers that you all have experienced? Could you reflect on that?
I mean, I'd flip it honestly. The podcasting is not at all hard to do. It is hard to do well. It's hard to do consistently. But to record a thing and get it up online, very, very easy. So the balance that we were really playing with, particularly early on, was how good does it have to be to put out, right? And as someone who both was trained by the academy to strive for perfection and also trained by my brain to think that perfection exists, which is funny. If it had been my show on my own, I don't know that it ever would have come out because it never would have been perfect enough for it to come out. But Elise's push to think about it as like Bikini Kill, Ani DeFranco, it actually doesn't matter if the sound is shit. What matters is what we're talking crap. What matters is that we're starting the conversation and we're doing truly anything. So to do it sustainably, to do it well, very difficult. And again, it's not something I would ever undertake by myself. But to do it at all, actually, we've got a webinar on the website that will walk you through the process, and you could get started today. It won't be good, it won't be pretty, but it's a start. And at this point, I feel like saying anything is better than deciding that it has to be perfect or you can't say anything at all.
I agree. I just want to say I think that one of the things we've encountered at our shop has been folks that want to make a podcast series, but they want to do it as kind of like a after work hobby. And I think one of the things that I have to try to reorient there is to say, hey, if you want to make an 8 episode limited series that includes, archival footage, interviews with other scholars, sound design, music, the whole thing, you want it to sound like Throughline, or you want it to sound like This American Life or something, um, you've got to look at that like this summer. Instead of writing that article you were going to write, you're going to do this, because it's probably about the same amount of work. And so the privilege involved there is, are you at a point in your career where you can do that? Are you tenured? Do you have job security? Can you take the time not to write the article that will become a JAR article, a Journal of Religion article, et cetera, and make the podcast series with us? That's a question. And then, the next question is, are you willing to kind of do the work to do it well? As Megan said, you can do it, but do you want to do it well? Do you want to learn a different form of scholarship in order to do this? One of the things that I think is easy for people to say behind public scholars' back is, well, just a bunch of sellouts who are talking to a bunch of dummies. How hard is that? And my response is, well, give it a try, Jerry. Let's see how you do, because it's really hard to be a good teacher. We all know brilliant people who are terrible teachers, and we all know brilliant people who are brilliant teachers. And public scholarship is about being a brilliant teacher. And it's not just talent, it's like work and craft and approach and pedagogy. And so, are you willing to write in a different way? Will you write a script for a podcast? Because that's different. Are you willing to move at a different pace? Are you willing to work collaboratively? When we write articles, often it's me in my room for 4 months, just pounding away. Are you willing to work in a team, to listen to feedback? These are the things that I think I look for in folks that want to work with us, because if they don't want to do it that way, or they're not able to, I know from experience, from things we've put out, that it's going to end up badly for all of us. And you're going to be unhappy. I'm going to be unhappy. The project's not going to go where we want it, and it's all going to not be what we imagined. And so I think there's the part of doing it well that Megan talked about. I agree, and it's just a matter of, it's the same question as, do I actually want to be a good teacher or not? Or do I just want to show up and sort of show everybody my slides and go home, and hopefully the reviews are good enough to get me promoted?
That is actually a major hurdle that I think most folks are not prepared for. The thing about doing something like a Keeping It 101 or a Straight White American Jesus or any of those shows is that if it's done well, it looks easy. And it's actually incredibly challenging to communicate clearly and concisely when your entire professional programming has been to do things at length and, let's be kind and say, prioritize precision over accessibility. So a place that I see folks get stuck, and not just for podcasting, I run into this at Religion Dispatches all the time, is when you are being asked to communicate in an unfamiliar and frankly very challenging way. Can you get past your own ego and learn from folks who have done this before, or are you just going to want to yell at me? Many scholars seem very interested in yelling at me, and that's fine. I have a healthy sense of self-esteem. I have a therapist. I adopted a puppy. I'm good. Yell if you want. But it doesn't get the article out. It doesn't get the point across. It doesn't get more eyes and ears on the work that you're trying to do, and it doesn't help people think more critically about religion. So helping folks who are not naturally drawn to or even inclined toward this kind of work learn to communicate in that way has been really challenging. But I think that's where the collaborative piece comes in, is can you learn from folks who have been doing this and doing this well for a long time? And my go-to is always Christian Peterson. He has been doing this for a decade plus, and again, making it look really easy. But there are sonic cathedrals everywhere for those with ears to hear. So I think Brad's right to point out, like, okay, if you want it to sound like this, you need to immerse yourself in that medium and learn what it sounds like and how to write that way. And if you're going to do it within the academy, because I know there are a lot of folks that are still deeply invested in that, it's not just enough to build the skill, it's convincing your department and your university that it is a skill worth valuing as research. Elise has done a ton of work around this. Hannah McGregor from the Amplify Podcast Network has done a ton of work with us, thinking about how do you peer review a podcast? How do you value the thousands and thousands and thousands of words of writing that go into doing that script as research in a way that's legible to your university? So this is another place where I think it's really important to learn from folks who are already doing this work.
For us, one of the things that's a challenge is that religion is in the public square it's a very, very fraught topic. It is, and we will say that religion has been the most influential force in American history, and we add a qualifier for good and ill. It's been both. The historical record is clear. What's the balance between showing things that religion has done that have been harmful to the American project and showing things that religion and religious persons have done that have benefited the American project? There's lots on both. And you just have to, we find we have to be very careful and circumspect and strategic about this. But it can be a difficult thing.
If I can just say quickly, I think some folks are like, well, what's the joys that come from this? And I think one of the things, and I don't know if my fellow panelists agree, but one of the things that I love about public scholarship and podcasting in specific is this is a place where your social and emotional intelligence is allowed to be part of what you bring to the table. I learned early on interviewing for jobs, being part of a grad program, that in the academy, signs of emotional or social intelligence or wherewithal are kind of seen as like, you seem like a normal person, not like one of us. Meaning you're probably not very serious. And I don't know if you'd fit in here at this prestigious university. And so I learned to like just hide all that and make sure that I didn't bring any of that. When it comes to public scholarship, that's an asset and it feels really good. And I if anyone out there is thinking about doing public scholarship, that's one of the things that I think I revel in is you bring yourself to this project, your social self, your emotional self, and your intellectual self. And that's often not the case in many spaces in the academy. And I do really like that part.
Yeah. One of the things Elise talks about a lot as a reason for why she wanted to get into podcasting after she earned tenure was she wanted there to be space for joy in her academic work. And the show was a huge undertaking, but it was also incredibly joyous. Yeah. And so, yeah, is another good reason to kind of think about doing something like this. I will say I did not do a good job masking how friggin' weird I am. And that's still being out in the world. But a thing that I want to add to everything that Brad has brought up, a thing that I see folks struggle with, particularly not to be a like geriatric millennial / baby Gen Xer, but I grew up in a time where to function in the world, you had to mess around and figure stuff out. And I see older folks and younger folks freeze when they're asked to navigate an app or try out a new program and just decide, okay, I can't do this. Podcasting for me and for us was very much about, we're just going to mess around and see what happens. And maybe it won't work and maybe it will, but it's worth trying. I think the Academy actively discourages that kind of ingenuity and creativity. And I want to encourage folks both within and outside the Academy to just like get in there and mess around and see what's possible. Like my other half of a job that Andrea mentioned, the Feral Nerd Consulting. Most of my income now comes from building websites. I took one class in web design in the year of someone's Lord 2000. I started messing around with HTML when I was in grad school and I just kept building on it. Now it's my job. In a time when the Academy is dying and when it feels like the world is dying and democracy is absolutely dying, I hope more people do more weird experimental creative stuff to help folks find joy and think more critically out in the world. End of pitch.
All right, we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon, but I just want to thank our panelists. This has been a really amazing conversation. I've learned a lot hearing from you all. So thank you so much.